I remember the day the humans joined our crew. 3 of them, standing in the docking bay of the Stellar Winds, looking so fragile with their soft skin and delicate limbs. As engineering officer, I had reviewed their credentials extensively. They were qualified, certainly, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off about them. "Welcome aboard," Captain Ventak rumbled, all 4 arms clasped behind his back in formal greeting. "I trust your journey was comfortable." The tallest human, Mary, according to her file, grinned. At a formal greeting. Well, the artificial gravity went out halfway through, so we had to patch the generator with some spare parts and a bit of creative wiring. But we got here. I felt my scales ripple in dismay. Passenger shuttles weren't meant to be patched, they were meant to be properly serviced at designated facilities. The captain, to his credit, maintained his composure. "I see, well, you'll be working with Engineering Officer Relith," he gestured to me with his upper right arm. "Fantastic," Mary bounded forward. How did they move so quickly with only 2 legs? And thrust out her hand. I stared at it until she awkwardly lowered it. "Sorry, keep forgetting about different cultural greetings. Looking forward to working with you. I've got some ideas about improving the efficiency of your warp core containment field." "The containment field is operating at optimal efficiency," I stated firmly. "Sure, by standard measures," she agreed cheerfully. "But I think we can push it about 15% further if we—" "This is Tom Martinez, your new navigator," the captain interrupted, perhaps sensing my growing distress. The second human, shorter but more broadly built, nodded respectfully. At least this one seemed to understand protocol. "Pleasure," Tom said. "Had a look at your standard routes already. Think we could shave off quite a bit of time if we—" "And May Williams, cargo specialist," the captain pressed on. The third human, with skin several shades darker than her companions, stepped forward. "Your cargo bay configuration is fascinating," she said, and I felt a surge of pride. The Stellar Winds boasted one of the most efficient cargo arrangements in the merchant fleet. I've got some thoughts about how we could increase capacity by about 40% if we— My pride withered and died. "That would be impossible," I said firmly. "The cargo bay's dimensions are fixed." All 3 humans grinned at me. It was unnerving. "Impossible is just a word," Mary said, already pulling out some kind of data pad. Actually, May added, "It's our word. Humans invented it. We just don't believe in it much." That makes no sense," I sputtered. "You created the concept of impossibility, but you don't accept it." "Pretty much," Tom agreed. "Anyway, about those flight paths." The captain cleared his throat. "Perhaps we should let our new crew members settle in before making any adjustments." He turned to me. "Relith, please show them to their quarters." As I led them through the corridors, they chattered constantly about improvements and modifications and optimizations. Every time I explained why something couldn't be done, they grew more excited. It was like they took each impossible as a personal challenge. I didn't sleep well that night. The humans had been aboard less than 6 hours, and they'd already proposed at least 20 impossible modifications to ship systems that had worked perfectly well for years. Worse, they'd started making sense. The containment field adjustments Mary suggested might work if one completely disregarded 3 separate safety protocols. Tom's proposed routes would be faster if one was crazy enough to plot courses that close to asteroid fields. And May's cargo bay reorganization. Well, it violated several laws of spatial geometry, but her calculations seemed sound. I didn't know it then, but these humans would completely reshape my understanding of possibility. And it all started the very next day, when the primary engine core failed in the middle of nowhere, and Mary disappeared into a Jefferies tube with a toolbox and that terrifying human grin. Looking back now, I really should have known what I was in for when I checked their personnel files. Every single one had official commendations for creative problem-solving in crisis situations. In human terms, I would learn, this typically meant did something that should have been impossible, probably while breaking several regulations and possibly a few laws of physics. But that's getting ahead of the story. Let me tell you about that engine failure, and how 3 humans armed with determination, duct tape, and a complete disregard for the word impossible changed everything. The primary engine core failure was, by all standard operating procedures, a catastrophic event. We were 3 weeks from the nearest station, our distress beacon was barely functioning, and the auxiliary power systems were showing dangerous fluctuations. By any reasonable assessment, we were doomed. I found Mary halfway inside a maintenance shaft, her legs dangling out as she hummed some human tune. "We need to evacuate to the life pods," I insisted, trying to keep the panic from my voice. "The core could go critical at any moment." "Nah," came her muffled reply. "Just need to bypass the main regulatory circuits and reroute through the secondary cooling system. Tom, can you get me that spare bit of conduit from Cargo Bay 3? "Can't." Tom's voice crackled over the comm. "Busy plotting an emergency trajectory that'll let us use that gas giant's gravity to slingshot us if we need to. May's getting your conduit, though." I felt my scales ripple in horror. You can't bypass the regulatory circuits. They're there to prevent a cascade failure that would. "Already done," Mary's voice echoed from the shaft. "May, where's that conduit?" "Had to dig it out from under some crates," May replied, jogging up with what looked like a piece of ancient piping. "But I think it'll work. Oh, and I've reconfigured the cargo bay to act as an emergency heat sink if we need it. Moved all the temperature-sensitive stuff to Bay 4. "You did what?" I screeched. "That's impossible." All 3 humans said it at once, and I could hear the grins in their voices. "Here's the thing," Mary said, emerging from the shaft covered in grease and looking far too pleased with herself. "The regulatory circuits are failing anyway. They're what caused the core problem in the first place. So bypassing them and setting up our own regulatory system using the secondary cooling array actually gives us better control." "But that's not how it's designed to work," I protested weakly. "Sometimes you have to work with what you've got," May shrugged, handing Mary the conduit. "Like using a cargo bay as a heat sink. Is it ideal? Nope. Will it keep us from exploding? Probably." Probably. I felt faint. "Speaking of probably," Tom's voice came over the comm again. "I've got that slingshot trajectory calculated. It'll get us to Outpost 47 in about 5 days if the engine holds. Bit of a tight squeeze between those 2 moons, but..." "Tight squeeze," I interrupted. "Between moons?" "Better than waiting for rescue," Mary called, already back in the shaft. "Okay, bypassing the last circuit now. May, flood the cargo bay cooling system on my mark. Tom, be ready with that trajectory. Relith. Maybe sit down." What happened next violated at least 15 separate safety protocols, several laws of thermodynamics, and everything I knew about starship engineering. Mary's impossible bypass worked perfectly. May's cargo bay heat sink kept us from overheating. Tom's insane trajectory threaded us between 2 moons with less than a kilometer of clearance on either side, using their gravitational pull to accelerate us to speeds our damaged engine couldn't have managed alone. We made it to Outpost 47 in 4 days and 22 hours. The repair crews there spent 3 days examining Mary's jury-rigged engine solution before declaring it technically impossible, but somehow working better than the original configuration. That was when I finally understood. Humans don't just ignore impossibility, they actively seek it out. They look at the impossible and see a puzzle to be solved, a challenge to be overcome, a rule to be bent until it breaks. And somehow, through determination or luck or sheer stubbornness, they make it work. After that incident, things changed on the stellar winds. Mary's engine modifications became permanent features. Tom's impossible routes became standard practice. May's creative cargo solutions doubled our hauling capacity. The rest of the crew, myself included, started looking at problems differently. Impossible became just another word, one that carried about as much weight as mildly inconvenient. These days I teach at the Space Academy. My course is called Human Innovative Practices in Engineering, but it could just as well be called Why You Should Never Tell a Human Something is Impossible. Every term, I start with the same story about 3 humans, an engine failure, and a piece of ancient conduit. Last week, I received a message from Mary. The Stellar Winds crew is still together, still pushing boundaries. They're planning to attempt something that every expert in the field has declared absolutely, completely, totally impossible. I didn't even ask what it was. I just sent back one question: need an engineer. Mary's reply was immediate: bring duct tape. I've already packed my bags. After all, impossible is just a word humans made up, and I've learned not to believe in it either. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I hope you loved it. Please remember to subscribe if you did like it so you can see more videos like this. And please give us a like and a comment too. I'll see you in the next one.